Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Madeline and this is Made with Books. And today I'm finally taking a look at how I did with my 2020 reading goals, and I'm also going to tell you about my 2021 reading goals. I know I'm a bit late, it's almost the end of January, but I hope you're still interested. And I would like to know, what are your reading goals for the year, if you have any, or if you want to tell me about any of your other goals if you have any. And if not, you can tell me that too, and maybe why you don't set any goals then. So yeah, the first goal that I had was the Goodreads reading challenge, and I set that to 52 books in 2020, knowing that on average I read more every year, and I just wanted to have like a relaxing goal and potentially read some longer books as well. And I did reach that goal. I read 63 books in 2020. Goodreads says it's a bit less, but that's because some of the things that I read were German literary magazines or anthologies that I didn't bother to put up on Goodreads. And I did also read some longer books as well. I read, and I'm looking down at my notes, I read 5 books that were between 400 and 500 pages. I read 2 books between 500 and 600 pages, 3 between 600 and 700 pages, and 2 that had over 700 pages. So I'm quite happy about that. And I decided I'm just going to keep this goal for 52 books for 2021 as well. Then I also mentioned that I was going to judge 2 rounds in the BookTube prize, and I did do that for 2020. I judged 1 round of fiction, and I filmed some individual reviews on some of the books I read for that round, so I will link those down below. And then I also judged a round of non-fiction, where I didn't really put up any videos for it because it was when I was on a bit of a hiatus. So very sorry about that, Robert. Yeah, I found some of my favorite books of 2020 through the BookTube prize. So I think it was a really good experience overall. I will say though that living in Germany, it took me a little longer to get the books, because you have 2 months where at the beginning you get told which books you're supposed to read, and then you have 2 months to read those books. And for me, they aren't available in my local library, so I have to buy them. And especially after COVID hit in the summer, when I was judging non-fiction, it took quite a long time for some of those books to get to me, because I couldn't get them through my local bookshop. Our bookseller, he couldn't order any English books at the time because of COVID, so I had to go through a different bookshop because I refused to use Amazon, and so it just took a little longer and took away from my reading time. So that was a bit stressful, I will say, but there was obviously some very special circumstances. I'm not judging the BookTube prize this year. I didn't sign up for it because I'm going to talk about this later. I want to reduce my TBR, and so I don't want to have to buy a lot of books for that. But the long list for the BookTube prize 2021 was announced this Monday, so yesterday for when I'm filming. So I will link down below to that video as well if you're interested and want to read along or want to read some of those books. Another goal that I just already alluded to was to reduce my TBR. And I didn't set a specific number, I just said I wanted it to be lower than it was at the start. And if you want to get the specific number, I will link down below to my 2020 reading goals video, and you can check that out if you're interested. It did increase though instead. So even though COVID hit, we wanted to support our book seller, so we bought some extra books because of that. But it increased only by 7 books, which is a lot less than it was in the past couple of years. And I still want to set this as a goal for 2021 to reduce my physical TBR, and we will just see how it goes this year, hopefully better. I then had several goals that were sort of numerical, so I set the goal to read 365 poems. I wanted to read 52 essays, 52 short stories, 12 non-fiction books, and 12 plays. And some of those goals I reached and others I did not. I did not read 365 poems. I was going pretty strong at the beginning of the year. I was reading from anthologies and literary magazines, so I had some poems through that. And then I also read 2 poetry collections. I read It's Hard to Be Hip Over 30 by Judith Viest, which was really good fun. And I did really enjoy this collection, although I will say that the feminism is very upper middle class white. So if you do check that collection out, keep that in mind. And then I also read Flowers of Evil by Charles Baudelaire. I read it in the German translation, which was translated by Therese Robinson. And that was a bit of more of an uneven collection for me. Some of those poems I would categorize as sexist and racist, so that wasn't really fun. But there were also some really, really good poems in here, I would say. And then, yeah, after that, once the pandemic hit, I kind of didn't read any more poetry. I didn't feel like it. And so I did not reach that goal. I did read, however, 275 poems overall in the year, so I was 90 poems short of my goal. I will still set it again for this year though, and hopefully I can reach it. Is the short stories. I did read some full-length collections. One of these was The Accusation by Bandy. I read this for the Asian Readathon back in May 2020. If you don't know what this collection is about, all these short stories were smuggled out of North Korea, and Bandy, the author name, is actually a pseudonym, so it is unknown who the writer is. And the collection gives us various stories from what life is like under the North Korean dictatorship. And I thought it did that very well. It had sort of these slice of life stories, very different stories, and I think it did justice to portraying what it's like living under a dictatorship. Some things in there sort of reminded me of stories from the former German Democratic Republic as well. At the end of the year, I also read some short stories from Ebony Rising. This is short fiction of the Greater Harlem Renaissance area. Sorry about the glare. And this is a huge collection of 52 short stories from the Harlem Renaissance. I only read a few of these towards the end of the year. And so I read, overall, in terms of short stories, I read 52 short stories, some of which were out of this collection. I had some that I really enjoyed. I really liked Matzi by Zora Neale Hurston in here, which it's about a hustler that is falling in love with a woman who just came to New York City and sort of has to adapt to city life. And she first tries to get away from him, eventually falls from him, and the question is whether he really has changed. I'm not gonna tell you more than that. Others I struggled a bit with. There was one that was pretty experimental, Pope Pius the Only by Richard Bruce Nugent. And it was sort of this experimental short story about drug consumption that I didn't get on with quite as well. But I definitely want to continue and finish this anthology this year. And I'm sure it's going to help me reach the goal for 52 short stories, as I'm keeping that as well for this year. The essay goal for 52 essays I also reached, and I have a complete separate video about that where I talk about the essays I read for that, so I'll link that down below as well if you want to check that out. And then another goal that I failed at is the goal to read 12 plays. I did read 3 plays instead. I read 2 Euripides plays. I read them together with Rosamund from Skeledendling About the Books and Lukáš from... He has a new channel name. It's something Cool Thesis, Cool Readers Thesis, something like that. I will link it down below. I'm very sorry, Lukáš. I haven't memorized your new channel name yet. And Mark, who doesn't have a booktube channel. And those were really good fun. And again, I think once the pandemic hit, we sort of stopped reading plays from there. I did really enjoy those too. The other play that I read was Birds of a Kind by Vadim Murvad, which I really liked. It was really good and very interesting and thought-provoking. I'm hoping to have a separate video where I talk about this book and 2 others, so I'm not going to say too much more here. And lastly, the non-fiction goal I surpassed. My goal was to read 12 non-fiction books and I read 20. Now obviously again the BookTube prize helped, but I also read just in general just a lot of non-fiction last year, at least for me. I also wanted to read one book from every continent and I definitely did not succeed with that goal. I read no books from South America, no books from Australia and Oceania, so I'm missing 2 continents there. And the large majority that I read was from Europe and North America, and so I'm really hoping I can shift that somewhat in 2021, and so I again will keep that goal. I also wanted to continue reading from my 30 books to read by the time I turn 30, which I'm turning 32 this year, so I did not reach that goal, but I will link down the video below if you're interested in what those 30 books are. And I succeeded very, very little in that I started one book from the list at the end of the year. Again, this is a buddy read that I'm doing with Rosamund from Scarlet Dandling About the Books, with Alan from Big Heart Books and Classics, and with Stephanie, who doesn't have a channel, and that is A Paradise Lost by John Milton. I am currently behind on the schedule. It is easier than I expected in terms of the language, but at the same time the language is still very dense, and as a non-native speaker this is quite an undertaking for me, but I am very much enjoying the story. And we're actually aiming to finish it by the end of January, so I'm hoping I can catch up until then. I also aimed for an ideal reading month, an idea which I took from Katie from Books and Things, and I will link down below to a video or 2 of hers where she's doing this project, so you can see the original. And my categories were different, but the general idea I took from her. So my categories were long-term TBR, which I classified as books that I've owned since high school, plays, a play per month, a short story or essay collection per month, a German contemporary, a book over 400 pages, a classic, a non-fiction book, a book that was gifted to me or borrowed by me, a book from my 30 till 30 list, which obviously tells you how I did on this monthly reading goal, and a reread. And so I did not achieve this ideal reading month at any point in the year. I got very close though in April and October, where I hit 7 out of the 10 categories, and I still averaged 12 books for a lot of these categories, so I am fine with that. It's more of a ideal reach goal, and I will keep the categories just as general guidelines of what I want to include in my reading. For 2021 I want to add just a few goals at the end. One is to read at least one book completely in Spanish, and I started reading La Biblioteca de Babel by Jorge Luis Borges, which feeds into another goal, and that is to sort of casually, I would say, participate in the #Invisible Cities project, which is hosted by a bunch of people, all of whom again I will link down below. And the purpose of this project is to promote translated literature and sort of international cultural awareness by focusing on 3 different countries each month, and not only reading books from those countries, but also watching movies from those countries, trying recipes from those countries, etc. And one of the countries for January is Argentina, so hence the Jorge Luis Borges book. Which I won't finish until the end of January. I've barely cracked into this. I read one poem in here and I started a short story, so this is going to take me longer. But yeah, I do want to participate in the #Invisible Cities project. I'm probably going to focus on the countries where I already have books from, since again I don't want to buy too many new books. I then have still quite a few books that I bought when I was studying English and German literature. And sort of these non-fiction academic reads, which I still want to read. I'm very interested in those. And my goal is to read at least one of those. So for example, I still have Bodies That Matter by Judith Butler, I read Gender Trouble during my studies. I read it in the second semester, which in hindsight was probably not the best idea to jump into something so difficult at the beginning of my studies. But I do want to read this one as well. And then I have History of Madness by Michel Foucault, or I could start reading The History of Sexuality by Michel Foucault. I have all 3 volumes of that. I also have a book on the Harlem Renaissance by Nathan Irwin Huggins, which would go well with the Ebony Rising short story collection. I have Orientalism by Edward Said, and I have Searching for Memory, The Brain, the Mind and the Past by Daniel Schechter. So at least one of those, or another one that I have on my shelves, I want to read. Those are just to give you an idea what I'm talking about, what kind of books. And then finally, I want to balance out my reading more in terms of the authors. So 2020 I read 48% white authors, and the number is only at 48% because I took Jewish authors into account separately, since I don't think I read enough Jewish authors. Only 6% last year, and especially being from Germany, I think that's important. And I do realize that with white authors and Jewish authors, I'm mixing sort of a racial category, and one that, term race again in Germany, not a good term, and sort of a religious / cultural category, which is complicated. And like I said, the categories in and of themselves are also complicated. So I will just say that I want the percentage of white non-Jewish authors that I read to be lower in 2021. And then I also want to read more books by queer authors or books with queer themes. That percentage was quite low from 2020. I don't know where it was at, but it wasn't where I wanted it to be, so I want that up as well. And then for BookTube, my goal for 2020 was consistency. And I think it's fair to say that I failed at that. So from the summer onwards, for any of you who've been following me for an extended period of time, you will know that I didn't post for several months. So I did start working more hours in 2020 every week overall, and we did have a pandemic, so I'm sort of okay with falling off the bandwagon there. But again, for 2021, I would like to average 1 video per week, and again, right now I'm not doing that, so hopefully I can get to that point. We will see. And I won't set any other BookTube related goals. I do have sort of some things in mind that I want to improve with the channel, but I won't get into here. Yeah, that's all I have. Thank you if you stuck with me till the end. And again, let me know about any bookish or otherwise goals that you have for 2021. And thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye guys.